Hi everyone, and welcome again in my studio. One of the most vibrant textures that you can create on the surface of a marble sculpture is achieved with the tooth chisel. But in order to do that, it's very important that the teeth on its cutting edge are always crisp, sharp. And in today's video, I'll show you how to do exactly that. When it comes to sharpening tooth chisels, I would claim that they're even more sensitive to heat than flat chisels, because not only is their cutting edge as thin as the flat chisels, but each individual tooth is very small, so there is less metal to diffuse the heat that is generated during the sharpening process. So you'll need to be extremely careful when sharpening tooth chisels. Exactly for this reason, regardless of the size, shape, and the material with which they are made, either hardened steel or carbide, I would always prefer sharpening them on the flat stone and avoid the bench grinder altogether. Also, because the teeth that you will need to sharp are so little, a flat sharpening stone will give you perfect control over the edge, and it will also not take too much of your time. I already mentioned this in other videos, but I can't state enough that sharpening chisels on a flat stone is the perfect way to start your day at the studio and enter that slow and quiet mindset that is so typical of carving stone by hand. It's also a nice way to take a break from the actual carving while keeping that same mindset. The sharpening of a tooth chisel consists of two stages, but first we need to consider the general shape of its cutting edge. If you look at it as a whole and don't think about the teeth, then its actual shape is exactly like that of a flat chisel. So the first stage of sharpening a tooth chisel is exactly the same as sharpening a flat chisel. Place the chisel on the flat stone, feel the right angle of contact, and then go back and forth. As always, a wider angle will result in a more sturdy and stronger cutting edge that is necessary for harder stones or a more aggressive carving style, while a narrow angle will give you a thin cutting edge that is more suited for the finer work. Once the edge is sharp, it may be possible that this is enough. In the end, you're using the edge of the teeth to cut through the stone and not their sides. But heavy usage will eventually consume the metal and you'll end up with a chisel with very short teeth. Here is a new chisel next to a used one. You can see how the teeth of the chisel on the right are completely consumed. In this case, you can reset them by cutting and recreating that space in between the teeth. There are a couple of ways to do so. The first one involves a metal hand saw. This is a process that you can apply only to hardened steel chisels, as carbide is way too hard to be cut with a saw. And if you have good quality hardened steel chisels, it might also take you a while because the steel of the chisels can be as hard as the steel of the saw. So let me show you how this looks like. You'll need a vise for this job. And I have here a nice and heavy vise. Take the chisel and place it in the vise with the teeth facing upwards. And remember to protect your ears because this will make a bit of noise. Place the saw between the two teeth and then start going back and forth. So this was one tooth and it took me about 15 minutes to make. There's also a much faster way to do this, and that is by using a rotary tool like this one in combination with a small diamond disc. By the way, this is also the only way with which you'll be able to cut the teeth into carbide chisels. I have here a disc that is 1 millimeter thick, and that fits just perfectly between the teeth of the chisel. So let me turn this to give you a better view of what's going to happen. So the chisel stays in the vise. Turn on the rotary tool and then gently drive it in between the teeth. And there you go. The chisel as good as new. Now I've showed you how to do this on a hardened steel chisel. You can follow exactly the same procedure to shape the teeth of carbide chisels. Bear in mind in both cases not to go too deep with the diamond disc, otherwise you might end into the softer part of the steel or go beyond the insertion of the carbide tip, which will eventually result in weakening the strength of the teeth. Now, what I had just explained was related to chisels with flat teeth. As you might already know from one of my previous episodes, there is also another kind of tooth chisel that has pointed teeth instead of flat ones. Here, you can clearly see the difference between these two types of tooth chisels. The first stage of sharpening this type of tooth chisel is exactly the same as before, namely on the flat stone. But with the regular use of the chisel and after many sharpening sessions, the points will start to regress and resemble more flat teeth. So to keep their pointed shape, you will need to use a file instead of a saw. Also here, like before, place the chisel with the points facing upwards in a vise, and then you can reshape the inside and the outside of the teeth with a file. I have, for this purpose, a set of small diamond files which have different shapes. This has a flat shape, there is one with a triangular shape, one with a cylindrical shape, and I believe that they are ideal for shaping the inside of the teeth. So I just place it in between and I go back and forth. Now you can also use these files to reshape the teeth of carbide tipped chisels, but that might also take you a while. So there is also another way to do that. Let me show you how that goes. So this, for example, is a tooth chisel with carbide tips, and I like to use a saw with a diamond wire to reshape its teeth. And it's very easy because the space in between the teeth function just as a pathway, and you just go back and forth in between with the saw. Okay, so these were a few of the methods that I use to sharpen tooth chisels. I hope they were useful. If so, feel free to subscribe to the channel, and if you have any comments, questions or suggestions, leave them below. As always, I'm Adar Jaber, and I'll see you next time.